Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining, both in the office and online. Um, so thank you all so much for joining today. Just a quick note, please hold on to your questions until the end. I'm hoping I should be able to get through the entire presentation, and so we'll have time for questions at the very end. And just for those of you online, we do have someone looking at IRC and YouTube for questions and comments as well. Thank you so much, Joe, for that. And with that, we'll get started. So that's me. My name is Edward Galvez. I'm an evaluation strategist on the learning and evaluation team. Our team, learning and evaluation, promotes the use of evaluation for learning to improve decision making that will better Wikimedia projects and communities. In short, we help people measure their impact and learn from their work. So I went to Wikimedia Commons to find pictures of communities, but I ended up going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I ended up with this community. So these ones will be taking us through the presentation today. As many of you know, Wikimedia is a global community from multiple countries, languages, ages, and all walks of life. And it is a guiding principle for the foundation to collaborate with communities. We want to make sure that we're hearing from communities when we're planning to do our work. And finding ways to engage with Wikimedians can be difficult. Oftentimes we use talk pages or mailing lists to try to get feedback, but that can be difficult from a large group of people. So one way for us to hear from communities is to use surveys. However, big surveys can be hard. As this guy doesn't look too happy right now. We're a global movement, lots of languages, lots of projects. It can be a lot of work for one team to survey the whole world, or all the editors that we have. So the idea was for us to band together as a community, as an organization across multiple teams to work together to survey our communities. And so that's how C Insights got started. So really briefly, what is Community Engagement Insights? So it's an annual global survey to help foundation teams hear from communities we serve so teams can make informed decisions. So why are we here today? I hope you're as happy as this one. So we're gonna talk about what we did, what we did in the survey, a little bit about what we learned, how we're using the results, and finally, time for questions at the end. So a little bit about what we did. So quick overview, we surveyed over 4,000 people across 4 Wikimedia audiences and 13 languages. And who did we survey? So we surveyed community audiences. There's 4 community audiences that we focused on. The first is editors or contributors. We reached them, we used a stratified sample, and we reached them through talk pages. We surveyed affiliate organizers, and for them, we made sure to reach out to all the affiliates, and we used emails to reach out to them. For program organizers, we have a list of contacts that we have, and just for context, the program organizer is someone who organizes the Wikipedia education program, or editathons, or GLAM workshops, things like that to promote Wikimedia. But we reached them using emails. And the last group was volunteer developers. We used a convenient sample. We don't really have a nice way to sample volunteer developers right now, so I sent messages on multiple mailing lists and different platforms like Fabricator to reach them. So what was in the survey? So we had 170 questions in all. Not everyone saw 170 questions. It's a lot of questions. So each kind of audience would see a different number of questions, and it was about 50 per person, give or take. So what do we ask in the questions? So we really focus our survey questions around the work that people are doing. So trying to, first of all, is trying to understand the context that that these audiences are doing, are volunteering in and doing their work in. But then related to Wikimedia Foundation programs, people want to know the awareness, like how many editors know about their program, or how much do people know about their program, how have they participated in various communication channels, for example, etc. So these are the types of questions that we asked. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. And who worked on this? So we had 11 teams participate this year. And you can see the list of teams on the left over there. And on the right, we have a list of folks who helped with this project. People help with question design, with communications. They developed some small software or tools or bots. They help with translation, copy editing, learning workshop, sampling. People did a lot, and so thank you so much to everyone who helped with this project this year. Huge thank you. So, before we get into the data, I wanted to quickly do an overview of our response rates this year. From editors, we had almost 3,800 people respond to the survey. It was about a 29% response rate for the people who we reached out to. And so we had about 11% increase from last year. For program organizers, we had 153. So we actually had more people respond this year because we tried to reach out to more program organizers, but we did see a decrease in the response rate. We're not quite sure why this is, but we're suspecting it might be some of our lists might be a little bit old. For affiliate organizers, similar as program organizers, we had more affiliates respond, but our response rate was lower. And we think that's probably because of the Wikimedia conference was happening like right at the end of the survey. So people were preoccupied. And then the last is volunteer developers. We actually saw a really big increase there, 37% increase in people who responded. And thank you to Maria Cruz for helping with the communications for that. So now we're going to go into the data. And so, yeah, let's see what we learned. So first, one of the big questions we often ask ourselves is, what is the diversity of the Wikimedia community? So let's look at what that means. Generally, this means, actually before I go back, generally this means the four measures we looked at was age, geography, gender, and education. So, and this is because this is the second year we're doing the survey, we can actually start to detect changes from one year to the next. So, in the next slides after this one, you're going to see some graphs with some of these terms. So I kind of want to quickly run through what these mean. So Middle East and Africa Wikipedias means Arabic Wikipedia plus a sample of other languages in the region. Asia and India Wikipedias is Japanese and Chinese. Eastern European is Russian and others. Western Europe is Italian, French, German, and Dutch, plus a sample of others in the region. Spanish and Portuguese is only Spanish and Portuguese because the editors kind of divide between Europe and Latin America in terms of their region and where they live. And then English Wikipedia is just English. And then all the other Wikimedia projects is a sample of everything else, but there's we do a little bit extra sampling of commons and Wikidata. So the languages that are listed here are kind of the majority of the people represented in each of these categories. So hopefully that'll help you with the next slides. Okay, so gender. So for editors specifically, just to call out actually before we move on, both program organizers, affiliate organizers, and volunteer developers are also on this slide, so we can kind of see differences across all the audiences, or how the audiences compare. So specifically for the editors, so all the Wikipedias and the other Wikimedia projects category, we did not find a statistically significant difference in gender. The average was still 10% women. And then if you look across the audiences, we can see kind of a range from Spanish and Portuguese Wikipedia, which is at 5%, all the way up to program organizers, which is pretty high. It was a pretty high increase this year to 35%. And then we did find, so when we looked at, and then coming back to editors, we did see differences when comparing between global north and emerging regions. We generally saw a decrease of editors coming from emerging communities or emerging regions. But we did have a change in our sampling strategy, which may have affected our response rates for emerging communities overall. So that's something that we can need to look at to see how much that affected our numbers. So yeah, so basically not too much change here. Age. So across the audiences, the median age is still between 35 to 44 years across all the audiences. For editors, there was a slight increase in age. Because these are categories, it's hard to describe how much that change was, but basically more people selected higher categories in the question. In general, younger Wikipedians are in Japanese, Arabic, and Chinese Wikipedias, or what I call them here, India and Asia, and Middle East and Africa Wikipedia languages. And then older Wikipedians are in English and in Western Europe. So the two on the bottom there. So now a little bit about geography. So geography, due to our sampling approach, it's a little bit difficult to weigh the data for this. So these are just kind of people who responded to our data. And because of how we sampled, we have a lot of people who came from Western Europe. So in general, we just have, and these are also, and the way that we sample is we pick the projects that are the largest. So in general, this kind of does still represent that Western Europe is a big portion of our editor population. Let's see. Yeah, and as I said before, we did detect a decrease of editors from emerging countries, but this might be due to a change in our sampling strategy. And what's useful to see here, is how editors, how the other three audiences kind of compare with editors. You do see a little bit more diversity because Western Europe is less represented compared to the editor population. So, and finally, education. So this was the first time we asked about education. Basically, a lot of people are very well educated. Among editors specifically, 85% have post-secondary education or higher. Program organizers and affiliate organizers have the highest levels of education, or over 90% have a first university degree or higher. And then Wikipedians from so Middle East and Africa and Asian Wikipedias have both the youngest and they have the least lowest education, which would make sense because if you have a lower population, then less people might have completed college. So we kind of expect that to happen. So in short, men continue to be overly represented across the audiences. Most contributors are from the global north. Across the audiences, everyone is well educated. And age is kind of the most balanced, but there are some communities that are younger and some are older. So quick summary there. So now we're gonna go into what is the current health of Wikimedia communities. This is gonna get into a lot of detail, so bear with me. So first is, how do we measure community health? So we use kind of three different categories of things that we're measuring. The first is what we're calling collaboration and engagement, so how well people feel like they're part of the movement and whether they're gonna continue participating in the future. Second is diversity and inclusion, and this is really how receptive is the community to different people, different voices, including diverse folks into their communities. And the last is harassment and conflict. So our theory is that conflict likely leads to harassment, and that's something that tends to happen on online communities. So that's something that we're trying to look at as well. These are not exhaustive measures of community health. These are just the ones that we're looking at for the survey this year. So before I get into numbers, I need to explain how these questions work a little bit. So collaboration and engagement. It is 6 question sets. Each question set has 3 to 6 statements. And an example statement is, I would recommend Wikimedia as a great place to contribute. So a person who responds to that question will either say, to that statement will say either they agree or disagree. It's on a scale of 5, so strongly disagree, disagree, neither, agree, and strongly agree. And then there's about 28 different statements in this specific one. And so those 28 statements are then grouped into these six different areas. So I'm going to go through each one. So engagement is about motivation to contribute. Foundation leadership is how contributors perceive the foundation's role in the movement. Feedback and recognition is how contributors learn from others and feel achievement in being part of the community. Problem solving and negotiating is how contributors are able to work through conflict or problems. Collaborative intention is how contributors support or don't support one another. And then awareness of self and others is how contributors perceive others' self-awareness. So not your self-awareness, but other people's self-awareness, which is that's a funny one. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through this next slide as well. So on the far left, you have the construct names. On the bottom there is the significance of the differences and the change. We can kind of ignore that for now. Next to the constructs, we have the mean. So this is the score. We took the average of all the questions within that specific construct, and we came up with a mean. And then they're listed in order from highest to lowest. Next to it is the percent change. So how much did it change from one year to the next, from last year to this year? And then question quality. So question quality is kind of for the researchers out there. So it's actually the Cronbach alpha for the construct. And I used a 0.7 as whether it's good or whether it needs work. And so this is about the wording of the question and how we group the different statements for each of these different constructs. Okay. The other thing to note is that we did have some changes to the wording, and when the wording changes, the comparability from one year to the next can be a little bit difficult. So they all change, except feedback and recognition did not change. The wording did not change. And for foundation leadership, there was a small change in one of the statements. So we're not sure if that really influenced it very much, but it did change a little bit. So we have to call that out. Okay. So now let me go one by one and just give a little summary. So engagement, there was a very slight decrease, but it still remains one of the highest measures. So it came down from 4.17 to 4.08. For foundation leadership, this one was the highest decrease among the measures. It decreased from a 3.86 down to 3.65. We're looking into these questions come from the community engagement department, and they're looking into what this decrease means and where it comes from, because we can kind of get a sense of where it might be coming from, because there's different statements within foundation leadership. Feedback and recognition, there were no changes found. Problem solving negotiating, there was an increase of 4.1%. Collaborative intention, there wasn't a change, and then awareness of self and others. So we had to modify this one from last year, but when we modified it, there was for a couple of statements, there was an increase of 5%. However, that one still remains pretty low. It's less than 3.0, which is something it's an area for improvement, really. Diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to run through these different statements really quickly again. So it's a similar approach, except that only the first four are the agree, disagree. The last two are a little bit different in terms of the question type, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But just to give you a gist of what each of these are. So individual commitment to diversity is a contributor's self-perceptions toward diversity. So they're reflections on diversity. Inclusive interactions measures whether communities have a space where people can communicate freely. Inclusive culture is whether individuals in the community take actions to improve diversity. Belonging is how included people feel among the people around them. Valuing diversity is contributors' reflections on whether their community values diversity through actions or policies. Presence of discrimination is how often contributors feel they are being treated unfairly based on personal characteristics. So Similar to last time, except only the first four on the top are the agree-disagree scales. The bottom two are a little bit different, and I'll talk about those when we get to them. So first, the first four on top. Individual commitment to diversity is doing well at 4.15. We do try to reach somewhere around 4.0 is what you try to go for. Inclusive interactions is a little bit lower. Belonging and inclusive culture are the two lowest in terms of diversity and inclusion. The other scales that we have, presence of discrimination. So this was a frequency scale. So how often do people experience discrimination? And across all the audiences, it was rarely or never. So that's something that we want to see. And then attitudes towards valuing diversity. So for this one, it's a little bit different. It's a list of statements, and people will check off which ones they think are present in their community. And so the statements are something. An example might be something like, leaders in my projects show that they value diversity on the projects through the policies that they create. And people either check that or not check that. And a total of, so for all the audiences, about 1.5. The average was 1.5 check marks out of 5. However, for program organizers and affiliates, they actually had a 2.5. So they had a pretty big difference from editors, which was 1.5. Okay, now moving on to harassment and conflict. So these are not so much constructs like the others. These are questions that specific teams are interested in answering. So generally, the experience of harassment has not declined since 2017, and it appears to remain steady. So 22% reported that they felt unsafe or uncomfortable in any online or offline space in the last 12 months. In 2017, it was 32%. However, there was a change in the language of the question. Last year, we didn't ask about the specific 12-month time period. And so we know that it's not worse because it's not higher than 32%, but we don't know if it's better. So we'll see. If we ask the question again next year, we'll be able to see if there's a difference. And then we also asked a question around the frequency of bullying and harassment on several of the projects. And in most cases, we didn't see a change. So there was a few small changes in Wikimedia Commons increased a little bit, Meta decreased a little bit, and Wikiversity decreased a little bit, but they were like very small changes. Yeah, so that's harassment and conflict. Let's see, so in terms of conflict, so the anti-harassment tools was interested in learning about conflict. And so they learned primarily context surrounding around conflict on the projects. They learned that about 43% of editors have tried to help resolve a conflict on Wikipedia. And then when we asked them why they help resolve conflict, 38%, we summarized the data, and it sounded like 38% said they were trying to help Wikipedia as an encyclopedia, whereas 39% said they're trying to help Wikipedia as a community. So some focused on the product, on the Wikipedia product, whereas others focused on the people. And then separately, these other two questions are around attitude questions. And 55% did not know where to turn for help when they are being attacked on Wikipedia. And 46% said that they felt they were freely able to express their thoughts without being attacked on Wikipedia. And for that one, we saw a difference between men and women responded differently for that last bullet, where women were a little bit lower than men. So this is a little quick break. It's a lot of information. All right. So now we're going to get into some stories about programs that support communities. So we have a lot of teams that support communities in different ways, and so I kind of want to, and teams submitted specific questions around their work, so I kind of want to showcase a little bit of the other types of questions that you can find in the reports. So, one second. Oh. Bad idea, sorry. Quick water break. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so communications department. So the gist of the communications department is that they help share the story of Wikimedia and the foundation to the world. And so they asked some interesting questions around how Wikimedians communicate. The first is around sharing about Wikimedia. So we asked folks, in what ways do you, and what channels do you share your work on Wikimedia? Like channels like social media, mailing lists, things like that. And we saw an interesting difference in how people share. So basically editors in general were a lot less likely to share anything compared to volunteer developers, program organizers, and affiliate organizers. Like this includes social media, this includes Wikimedia mailing lists, et cetera. And they just generally don't seem to share things about their work on other channels. And then on the flip side is how do they learn? Like where do they learn information or receive information? And so we asked this question, what channels do you use to learn about Wikimedia Foundation features and services? And is it black and white? It is black and white, at least on me. Oh, okay, good to know. So basically, so this is a little bit hard to follow because it's a heat map. It has a lot of information on it. But basically, we have all 4 audiences represented here from both 2017 and 2018. Where you see the shades in darker red or in just darker color, those are affiliates, program organizers, and volunteer developers. So basically we see affiliates, program organizers, and developers use a wide variety of different channels to learn about the foundation features and services, so like the blog, social media, conferences, et cetera, mailing list, project pages, et cetera. On the flip side, if we look at editors, you see it's a lot lighter in color. So they generally just don't use as much, these channels as much compared to affiliates and program organizers. In total, about 45% of editors said that they don't use any of the channels to learn about Wikimedia Foundation services or features. So that was some interesting context to learn about. So. Community resources supports communities with resources like funding for projects or events and as well as other support. And so they had some interesting questions around the conferences that they support. So all the conferences like Wikimania, Wikimedia Conference, regional events, and they wanted to learn what is the outcome of these conferences? What are people taking away from coming to these conferences? So this is another difficult chart to read quickly, but so all the conferences are on the left-hand side, and on top are kind of 5 different outcomes. So I'll kind of summarize them from left to right. So on the left side, it's discovery, and then on the far left is discovery, followed by starting a project, followed by resolving conflict or changing policy, followed by recognition, followed by improving or learning a skill or learning or learning a skill in general. So in general, all conferences seem to be really good at discovery as well as starting or improving projects. So you can kind of see that because the 2 left columns are darker in shade. However, Wikimania seemed to be the best. So you seem to really excel for people to discover new things. And then some other conferences were better at different things. So we see that Wikimedia Conference and national and local Wikimedia Conference and national and local conferences kind of are really good at helping to resolve conflict or possibly change policy. So that's in the middle column there. You can see the 2 slightly darker shades. And then in terms of learning or improving skills on the far right, we see that regional, national, and thematic events are best suited for learning. And then participants, and then the least often selected was recognition, which is the second one from the right. Participants less selected that least often among all the different outcomes. So this was interesting to learn. Finally, my team, learning and evaluation. So we support affiliate and program organizers in using data for learning and improving program design. So we asked some questions around people's capacity to do evaluation. So how well do you take the time to plan your project and also figure out how you're going to measure the impact of your program? So we ask affiliate and program organizers a set of questions around this. And in general, what we're seeing is a general increase in evaluation capacity. So this is a little bit difficult to read, but basically the bars in the green is related to a survey that we used to do, where we had a very focused list of people that we emailed the survey to. But now in the last 2 years, since we started doing community engagement insights, it's the number of people participating in this survey has expanded. So while we do see a bit of a decrease in that light blue one there, because we expanded the scope, we are still seeing an increase this year. Basically, in general, there's been an increase in evaluation capacity. So yeah, so this is really great. And then community relations. So the community relations team supports communications between the foundation staff and Wikimedia stakeholders, and they also learn some interesting things around context. So we asked the questions about how do editors prefer to receive updates about software development from the Wikimedia Foundation. And tech news is the most preferred resource among both low and high activity editors. Low activity editors also seem to rely more on social networks and the blog, while high activity editors seem to rely more on village pumps and Wikimedia news sites like the Signpost or in the Courier. So yeah, it's a lot of data. Okay, so next is the so similarly, this is how do people receive updates, and then this is how do people give feedback to developers. And we see that the majority of editors don't really care to give feedback to developers. You can see that in the 59 and the 51% on the far left. Affiliate and program organizers seem to use Fabricator often, so that's in green. And you can kind of see the three groups on the right-hand side, the Dev, PL, and AFF. You see that the three green colors are a little bit higher. And then volunteer developers use Fabricator as well as MediaWiki.org. And then we also see that program organizers, so the PL there on the second one from the right, they also use Wikimedia mailing. No, they actually also don't really care as much to give feedback to developers. So, so some interesting context around how our audiences like to send and receive information from the foundation. Okay, so we have all this data. It's a lot of information. So how are we actually using this information? So we held a bunch of learning workshops with each of the teams that participated to help them understand and use the results. And thank you to Dana McCurdy for helping with those. So first, it's important to note that using data takes a lot of time. All the teams are in some kind of conversation about how they're going to use their data, either to do more research, to improve their programs, or even to ask different questions in the survey this year. But I wanted to share a few of the highlights of how teams are starting to think about how they're going to use the results. So anti-harassment tools, they want to use data to inform various projects, like they're working on developing community health metrics and designing a reporting system for conflicts. Community programs is thinking about exploring trainings, as well as communications and advocacy for education and increasing Wikipedia library awareness. Partnerships and Global Reach is looking to reach out to Wikimedia affiliates who mentioned that they need to help with partnerships and explore how to increase awareness of the teams in some region. The legal department wants to discuss and continue to develop their communication strategy for the semi-annual transparency report. Learning and evaluation, we want to teach organizers how to create a culture of learning, possibly using train-the-trainer programs. And finally, trust and safety is looking to improve the awareness of the emergency @Wikimedia email address. So teams have really started to dig into the data and have started to find specific things that they can use in their planning and in their work, which is pretty awesome. All right, so what's next? So as I said, teams are starting to use the results. It takes a little while for teams to incorporate into their work, and we're gonna kind of follow up with them and see how that goes. See Insights 2019, so next year's survey is already getting started, and we're hoping, well, the survey will be distributed in April of next year. And so what you can do now, please read the reports. You can find it on Meta. And there are 11 team reports as well, so you can kind of dig into each team based on what you're interested in. And feel free to post your reflections or questions on the talk page. And just ask yourself the question, how is the data useful for you and your work? So that's it. Any questions? Joe has a question.
We do have one question. Let me just put this.
Yes.
So forgive me if you've already answered this question during the thing, but has sense of community ever been measured?
Sense of community.
I suppose people, editors and various audiences believing themselves to be part of a community.
We do have a question around belonging. I'm not sure if that question is specifically whether they identify as being in a community. I would need to take a look at the statements to see what they ask, but it could be in there. James, here.
I saw a rather big dip in foundation leadership or the perception of such. Do you have any insight as to what caused that dip?
So the community engagement department is working on trying to figure out what that means. We are looking at, so you can take a look at, so because there's, I think there's 3 statements in there, we can kind of see which ones were the ones that dipped from last year. And so we need to take a look at like where it's coming from. So it's something that we're looking at. Yes, that's a good point. Yes, it is the second highest. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, so Jamie, who is the one who writes the questions for the CE Community Engagement Department, she said that the foundation leadership one is still the second highest among all the constructs, so that's something to note. And there just might be a what's called a regression to the mean. So as you do the survey year over year, there's the higher measures and the lower measures will slowly move towards some mean in the future. So yeah. Any other questions? It was a lot of information, I know. Anything surprising? Interesting. Nothing surprising. Do you guys like the penguins? Yeah. Okay. There are no more questions. Yep. Oh, there are no more questions. Thank you all so much. Please do check out the report. I know it's a lot of information, but especially if you work with communities, it can be really helpful to kind of tell you a little bit more about them and about how we're working with them. So yeah. Read the report, add your comments. Thank you. Oh, that's it. Thank you so much.